Are the giants in your life getting a little too strong? Is the size of your giants a little too big? Well, this is a program for you. Welcome back. Thank you for coming to Crosstalk. Well, we are going to discuss a brand new name for God. You know, we're doing a whole series on the names of God and how he started revealing himself to his people through his names. Well, let's go back to our chart, the one that we've been working on for a while. Remember that we said that it's very, very important never to take the stories of the Bible on their own, like if they were separate stories. Actually, they're not separate stories. They're all part of the great history of redemption. So let's start from the beginning, shall we? Now, we started with Adam, Noah, Abraham. Then we went to the people of Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel. Now, aside from that, we know he had sons who eventually became the people of Israel or the nation of Israel. Well, when we get to the end of this period, we get to the Exodus in the Bible. Then we talked about Moses and some of the names that God revealed in the time of Moses. Yahweh Rophe, I am your healer. And then we talked about Yahweh Nissi, my banner. The Lord is my banner. Then we talked about the period of the judges between Moses, when they got to the promised land with Joshua, all the way to David. In between, we have a period of time that there are no kings and there is no real leader for the whole nation, and we have the judges. So we talked about Gideon and the name of God that he found out, Yahweh Shalom, the Lord is peace. Well, now we're going to spend a little bit of time on David. Now, of all the people of the Old Testament, probably David is the one that is most typological of Christ, which means that there is a lot about David that is symbolic of who Christ would be. And by now, we are 1000 BC, which means that we are about 1,000 years before Christ. After that, his kingdom would be divided into two segments, north and south. So when we talk about David, we look very closely to the stories of David because Christ would be what we call a Davidic king. It would come from the descendants of David. As a matter of fact, both David and Jesus were born in the same town. They were born in Bethlehem. And the reason why it's so important to understand that is because he is typological. He is the one pointing to Jesus Christ. So he's born in the same town as Jesus Christ. We know he's of the lineage. Jesus Christ is of the lineage of David. He would be a king like David. And many of the things that will be talked about in the New Testament actually have the information that we've been given in the Old Testament about David. So when we get to the story of David, when we start talking about David in the Bible, we certainly have to open our eyes because we're about to learn more about Jesus Christ, even back then in the Old Testament. Don't forget that everything from Genesis to Revelation is about the plan of salvation and how Jesus Christ will come to redeem the world. So let's go to 1 Samuel chapter 17. Now, this is a fascinating story that many of us know since we're little kids. This is the story of a giant and a little boy. You know, Goliath. Except that most of us are facing giants until today in our own lives. And sometimes our giants get a little too big, a little too strong. And we need to be reminded all over again of those lessons that God taught Israel through the battle of Goliath and David. So let's go to 1 Samuel chapter 17. Let's start on reading on verse 1. Remember that when we study together, if you're at home, it would be great if you can have your Bible and paper and pen so you can take notes and start studying together with me and with whoever else you want to invite. So chapter 17 starts like this. The Philistines gathered their armies for battle. Who are the Philistines? Where did they come from? Well, the Philistines in history are people that were called the people of the sea. They came from the sea area, from the Mediterranean Sea. You know, if you look at a map of Israel today, and you look to see what part Israel has close to the Mediterranean Sea, you can see that's where the Philistines were from. 1200 BC is when these people were very powerful. They actually are known for their ships and many other things. They were battle people. They knew what they were doing. Aside from that, we are told here that they had a champion. And not only were they pretty good themselves fighting, but they had a champion. And the champion's name was Goliath. Now let's read about it. Verse 4. A champion came out from the armies of the Philistines. Now they are battling against Israel. Remember that God had already taught Israel that all the power for battles comes from the Lord. That they had a banner, Yahweh Nisi, the Lord my banner. But you know, every once in a while Israel forgot about that, the same way that sometimes we forget about it. So here we have in chapter 17 verse 4, then a champion came out of the Philistines. Oh, this was a big man. You know, sometimes I think as a child, I thought he was a little larger than he really was because we all actually had pretty much his height, and he was about 9.5 feet. It's still a very, very tall man, but it's not like I imagined him. I always imagined him like really, really tall and big. But he's 9.5 feet. He's strong. He's actually very skilled in battle. And I mean, even his sword, we're told how much he weighed and everything. I mean, it would have been a pretty majestic sight to see this man. Now he comes up, and for 40 days, he taunts the people of Israel. 40 days. You know, in the Bible, 40 days are very significant periods. These are periods of time in which God will test to see if his people will trust him for deliverance. So you find many 40s in the Bible. You know, you have 40 days of the spies. Remember that when they went to the promised land, the spies were there for 40 days. You have 40-day flood in Genesis. You have 40 days of Jesus in the desert, waiting for God to deliver him and not delivering himself, even though he had power to do so. We have 40 years in the desert. We have many, many 40s in the Bible. They are periods in which the people are tested to know if they trust that God is the only one that can deliver. Okay? The only one who can deliver. So here we have this champion, 9.5 feet tall, taunting. And you know, I'm sure he looked pretty impressive because all of our giants look impressive. They look big. They look greater than us. And so for 40 days, he's talking against the people of Israel. And you know what's interesting? What is very interesting is that the people of Israel actually had their own giant. We are told that their king, King Saul, was 1 head taller than everybody else in Israel. So what, maybe he was about 7 feet? And where was this champion? How come he didn't show up against the champion? See, at that time, there was a style of battle that was done through representatives. See, the two armies would get there, but their champions would fight. It's something like we do in the Olympics, where one person represents a nation in a particular sport. And so their champions would fight. And you say, well, Saul is the champion. He's the king, and he's the tallest man in Israel. Where's Saul? But Saul is nowhere to be found. As a matter of fact, we are told that he was terrified. Chapter 17 of 1 Samuel, verse 11, when Saul and all of Israel heard these words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. You know, giants have a way of making us fearful. Giants have a way of making us lose our focus. And he did for Israel. Goliath became everything they talked about. They didn't talk about God and how strong God was and all the things God had taught them in the past. They kept talking about how big his sword is and how much he weighed and how tall he was, and everybody's focusing on the giant. But you know what? Every once in a while, it's time to stop talking to your God about the size of your giants and start talking to your giants about the size of your God. And that's exactly what David did. David shows up. He's a little lad. He's a young man coming from Bethlehem, because remember we said that Bethlehem was the town of Jesse, the father of David. Of course, Jesus would be born in the same town, because all the Bible is connected. Never forget that. We are discovering the plan of salvation as the Bible develops. So he comes from Bethlehem, says verse 15. And here he finds this Goliath. And instead of talking about Goliath, how big and tall and strong he was, David shows up talking about God. You know, there's a change of pace here. Instead of talking about the giant like everybody else was talking about the giant, he starts talking about God. As a matter of fact, if you read this story, it's a ratio of 9-1. 5-1. 9 times he talks about God, and only 2 times about the giant, and those 2 times in a derogatory way, meaning saying, who is this uncircumcised Philistine that thinks he can come here and just show his sword, and the armies of the living God are going to just fly away? Well, David understood that the power of salvation did not come from his own strength. Even though he was a skilled shepherd and he had killed a lion and everything else, he knew that that's not where it came from. And I'm going to show that to you in a moment, because this is one of those lessons that we need to learn. And there's a name of God in this story that I would like us to add to our collection of names of God, because God is revealing himself in different ways, in different aspects, so we understand who he is. So let's see if we can pick this up. Verse 24 of the same chapter. When all the men of Israel saw the man Goliath, they fled from him and were greatly afraid. And David said, what's happening? How come everybody's running? And they told him. Then David spoke, verse 26. David spoke to the men who were standing by him, saying, what will be done for the man who kills this Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should taunt the armies of the living God? See, he changes the talk. He changes the language. He's no longer talking about Goliath or the Philistines or how tall, how big, how strong. He's talking about his God. Because there comes a time when instead of talking to our God about the size of our giants, we have to start talking to our giants about the size of our God. And you know, he had to overcome a lot of things to do that. And the reason why he had to was because there were all these other voices telling him anything else. They said, you know, you're a little shepherd. You can't go with 5 stones and think you're going to kill this very skilled warrior. You know, even Saul gave a prophecy to David. He says, you are not able to go against this Philistine. How would you like that for a good cheering team for you? Verse 33. You can't, David, you can't. I mean, it's great that you want to, but you can't. And so he gives him the armor, Saul's armor, the one he should have been using fighting against Goliath, but, you know, Saul was terrified. And David says, you know what? This is not my armor. And I'm not coming because I'm strong. I'm coming because I'm coming a particular name. And the name has power. And the name is strong. And so we get this interesting dialogue. You know, sometimes you got to not listen to certain voices, you know. Some voices you should listen to because they're godly counsel. But all those voices that say you can't, you just can't. You're not able, so forget about it. Those voices you should ignore. And listen to the voice of God in your heart that says, hey, it's because of me, not because you're skilled with the sling or anything else. So David starts making his point, and you know what I'm going to do so you remember this? I am going to use 5 stones, because we know he grabbed 5 stones from the river. But to each one of these 5 stones, I will take you through 5 things that David did and said that all of us need to when we face our giants. Let's start with the first one. Number 1, verse 37. The Lord, remember every time we see Lord with capital letters, is Yahweh. You know, the God of Israel, the name that God had given for himself. So he said, the Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear. So the first stone is, don't forget the way God has led you in the past. You know, it's very important to remember that God has been with us in the past. He has given us strength and deliverance. So don't forget what he has already done in the past. That's the first thing. Number 2. The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear, he will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. So the second one is a prophecy. David not only remembers the past, but he makes a prophecy that God is actually greater than Goliath. That God is the one that will deliver. It's not him. It's not who he is and the skills he has. He makes a prophecy. He says, Yahweh will deliver me. The third thing, which I love, I really love this story because I've used it many times when I have to actually face my own giants. The third one is the name that bears the title of this program. He says to Goliath. See, David goes with 5 stones and he faces this great giant. And this giant, we're told, says all kinds of things and curses him in the name of his gods. But we are told in verse 45 that David says, yeah, I know you have a big sword. I know that you are a very skilled warrior. Verse 45, David said to the Philistines, you come to me with a sword and a spear and a javelin. So I know you're very good, Goliath, but, I love that but. Nevertheless, says Goliath, I have something, and this is what I have. I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts. Well, this is the name we're learning today. It's Yahweh Tsebaoth. Yahweh Tsebaoth. Which means I come to you in the name of the Lord of the armies. The armies of heaven. The armies of the universe. I have an army behind me that you can't see. And I'm coming with that name. It's the Lord God of all the armies ever. You know, there's more than 240 times that Yahweh Sebaoth is used in the Old Testament. And God is revealing to us that we don't see things the way they are. That the power comes from him because he is a mighty warrior that does for us what we cannot do for ourselves. And David says, look, I'm not the champion of Israel. No, Yahweh Sebaoth is the champion of Israel, and I come in his name. So the third stone is where the power comes from. So where does the power come from? Well, Yahweh Sebaoth, the Lord of hosts. So he says, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have taunted, Goliath. You shouldn't do that to my God, because my God is Yahweh Sebaoth. And so we continue, and number 4 tells us what was his priority. So I'm going to use the 4th stone. So you're following here, past, prophecy that God was with him. And then the third one is where the power actually came from. And then the 4th one is what was his priority. And this is what his priority was. Verse 47. That all this assembly may know that the Lord does not deliver by sword or by spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give it to me into our hands. Here saying that the whole world may know who God really is. That was his priority. It was to honor God and glorify God, that everybody in the whole world may know who God was. See, if you are fighting battles and your priority is that people may know who God is, I tell you, Yahweh Sebaoth is with you, because it's all for his glory and his honor. And then I like the 5th stone. They're all P's, as you probably already figured out, that I chose for you so you won't forget. The 5th one is passion. You know what David does when he's done speaking? He doesn't walk towards the Goliath. No, David ran quickly towards the battle line to meet the Philistine. You know, once he said, okay, I got it. Let me tell you about my God. My God is so big, so he has already delivered me in the past. And you know what? I'm going to make a prophecy. He will deliver me again. The power is in his name, Yahweh Sebaoth. My priority is that people will know who he really is. And so now I have the passion to run towards the giant and not away from him. Well, you know, the end is a wonderful ending. He took the sling, and with the first stone, he hit the giant, which of course had nothing to do with his skill, even though he was a very skilled slinger, I guess would be the name. It wasn't because of that. It was because God has the power to do for us what we cannot do for ourselves. And there's one very important point here. As soon as Goliath fell, all the Philistines left because that was their champion, right? Actually, let's finish the story. Verse 51, when the Philistines saw that their champion was dead, they fled. The men of Israel and Judah arose and shouted and pursued the Philistines as far as the valley and to the gates of Ekron and so forth. What is the very important point to learn? Well, this style of fighting with champions is the style that teaches us how salvation is done. See, we don't have enough power or strength for this great war of the great controversy. And so we have two champions. We have Lucifer and his army, and we have Jesus Christ and his army. And the gospel teaches us that Jesus did, as a representative of the human race, what we cannot do for ourselves. This is one of the core theologies of the whole Bible. It's called Adamic Christology. It says that if Adam fell, and as a representative of the race, the whole human race fell with him, Jesus is the second Adam. And because he died, then anyone in the human race that wants to align himself after this champion then would be okay. You know, so in that sense, it's very important to understand what Adamic Christology means, because our champion has won. And that's the good news of the gospel. You know how many people miss the gospel because they don't understand that the battle was won at the cross because Jesus is our representative. He died in our place, on our behalf. You know, the good news of the gospel say exactly this thing, that through the one man and what he did, all that want to align themselves under this champion have eternal life. Actually, let me read it to you. This Adamic Christology that talks about the first Adam and the second Adam, saying, if you are under the first Adam, then of course that means that you are dead because the human race has sinned and fall short of the glory of God. But if you are under the second Adam, then his obedience was also on your behalf. Romans chapter 5, verse 18. So then as through one transgression there resulted condemnation to all men, and that's Adam, even so through one act of righteousness there resulted justification of life to all men. So one lost everything for us, Adam. One won everything for us, Jesus. Verse 19, as through the one man's disobedience the many were made sinners, so through the obedience of the one, capital, the many will be made righteous. See, the concept of representative is very, very important to understand the gospel. The good news, one of the times that the word good news is used in the Old Testament is in Isaiah 52. It says, blessed are the feet of him who brings good news. Well, good news was the cry of battle when a messenger came and said, look, our representative out there has fought the war and has won. So they would come, and in Hebrew they would be yelling, Bashar, Bashar. Can you imagine the whole city waiting for the news to see if the representative have lost or if the representative have won? And they could see by the way that the horse would gallop. They could know if it was good news or bad news. And this man would shout, Bashar, Bashar, good news. Our representative has won. Therefore, we're free. Because if he had lost, we were slaves. So Isaiah 52 says, blessed are the feet of him who brings a Bashar, who brings a evangelion, a good news in Greek. And that's what Paul takes in Romans and says, okay, let me tell you what the gospel is. That in Jesus Christ, our representative, all of you that want to accept him as your representative have already won. This is the good news of the good news. This is the best news you could ever get. That's how it works. So, if your giants are getting a little too big, the first thing you got to remember is that the real giant, the real thing, happened at the cross. That this is where our representative won the battle once and for all. This is where it happened. So that's the first thing you got to remember. So you are not always wondering about your salvation. And if your giants of daily life are really getting big, then remember this. Sometimes, maybe this is the time. It's time to stop talking about God about the size, to our God about the size of our giants. And perhaps it's time to start talking to our giants about the size of our God. Remember, the 5 stones, the past, the way God has led you in the past. Make a prophecy. You know the end from the beginning because you already know what has happened. The power is in the name of God, who he is, Yahweh Sebaoth. And then remember the priorities to always bring glory and honor to Jesus Christ in your life. Then you'll have the passion to run towards your giants and not against them, not the other way, because you're going against them in the sense of you're ready. Why? Well, because your representative has actually won for you already. So this is my message today. Are you facing giants? Remember this mighty name of God. The mighty name that says, Yahweh Sebaoth, the Lord of hosts, of the armies of heaven and earth. And when you understand that name, you will know that actually God is with you. And you have nothing to fear because he is the one